So I went away and had a bit of a think about how I wanted to approach this next section. Um, my plan is on the text document on the left. So obviously an introduction. What we did last episode was just had a quick look at scaffolding and what code that gives you, plus sort of interacting at a basic level with models and views and controllers, primarily the model and how you interface with that at a code level. I have too frequently brushed over inheritance. We're going to do a very quick inheritance example just so you guys can understand what it is and how it's used. So you get a bit more of a feel for where some of these magical methods, as they're called, come from when we're using them. Then we're going to add a gem. We're going to add the Bootstrap gem. If you guys are not familiar with Bootstrap, it's a CSS framework. One of the more popular ones out there. It basically gives you a whole bunch of pretty CSS and JavaScript that you can use to make your application look pretty polished. I guarantee you would have seen it out there. It's has a very typical look to it, and a lot of websites make use of it, especially to start. It gives you a whole bunch of interesting stuff. I don't want to go too much into what it does and does not do for you, but suffice to say, it's a fantastic starting point to get your application running with some great features in CSS pretty much for free. Then we'll go ahead, create a thread model, talk a little bit about associations, so how we can associate the thread to the forum and validate that works the way that we expect, and also talk a little bit about a tiny bit about error handling and what happens when you break referential integrity, which is basically a forum has many threads. A thread has or belongs to a forum, and if for some reason you were to try and create a thread that does not belong to a forum, it would go, oh, please don't do that. Or if you deleted a forum that belonged to a thread, then it would blow up. Although the latter one is a little bit different and a bit trickier to handle. We'll then create a controller for the thread and start trying to deal with some of the actions behind that. And go into some of the methods and magic that I skipped over when we were looking at the forums controller. Things like this before action, this kind of crazy mumbo jumbo here, and sort of what this is doing. Things like that. So, all right, let's get into it. I've pre-written some of this code for inheritance because I'm lazy. Well, I'm actually prepared, but we'll go and have a look at how it works. So we're going to take the example of an animal, and we're kind of familiar with most of this already. Ignoring this code, we'll get rid of it. This should be completely familiar to you. An animal has an attribute name, as in we call it Bob. And it has a method that says, Bob is walking. So it substitutes. This is string interpolation. This is basically, it says, get this string and put it inside of this string here, if that makes sense. And we can have a look and see what this does. So put that back, get this code. Oops, we're not in IRB. Let's open IRB, we don't need anything else. So we'll create that animal.new, and if we type walk now, it will tell us that's bad. Oh, excuse me, it will actually just do nil. So you can see here it would have substituted in nil. And if we were to say animal equals animal.new and animal.name equals Bob, animal.walk, and say Bob is walking. So you can see that that's how it does string interpolation, it's called. You cannot do this, it's worth noting, you cannot do this with single quotes. I will show you what happens. Name is Bob, walk. It will actually output the words itself, like the text itself. So it's important that you do double quotes when you're doing string interpolation. So right, let's do some inheritance. So you can imagine that the animal kingdom has hierarchies to it. I can't talk too much about families and genuses and all that kind of stuff. I'm not hugely great on all of that and well versed in it, but suffice to say that a lion is a type of animal. So in programming, we could feasibly call that a subclass of an animal, which means when it's a subclass, it is inheriting from a parent class. So we can see here a lion is inheriting from an animal class. And we've talked about this before briefly and said, well, that means that it inherits the attributes and methods of the animal class. So let's define animal. Actually, let's redefine animal so we don't have that bad code. And we'll define the animal class. We'll create a lion. We'll call the lion Sir Reginald. And then we'll make him walk. And we can see here, it has actually used the code for walk from the animal class. So it's inherited that code. There will be people out there who will whinge at me for using inheritance here and say, well, you should use this thing called composition. But it's important to know how inheritance works because it is used in Rails and you will need to know how it functions. So let's do some interesting stuff. Let's see what happens when you change the animal class. So if we say name is walking, watch out, and change the animal class, remembering that lion is inheriting from animal, and we've changed the code inside of animal, what do you think is going to happen when I run walk again? It actually updates immediately. So you don't have to reinstantiate your class for this to work. It will immediately update. And so that's one property of inheritance. Obviously, one of the things that we've seen is that it's actually able to use this attr accessor within Lion. And then there is one more thing that we want to talk about. We won't talk about a concept called encapsulation. Because it's not really useful in terms of Rails. If you want to learn more about it, look up any tutorial on object-oriented programming, and they will discuss it. It's kind of a core concept. But we will talk about overriding things. So if we come into here and we know that the walk method is already defined and we can use it, but let's say that lions don't walk the same way, or they don't want to walk and say the same thing. So let's make him walk in a slightly different way. So we can say, I am a lion, hear me roar. It's a slightly contrived example, but the point remains that now if we were to, well, let's see what happens if we do lion.walk. You can see here it's actually overridden the inherited method walk, so it's overridden this walk method. Sorry, I should be doing this. It's overridden this walk method with this walk method. And that's effectively what we're doing in Rails when we're defining certain attributes and certain methods. There is some magical methods happening and things like that, but this is effectively inheritance at the basic level. and that's how it functions. I don't think I need to go into any more detail. I won't do a programmatic implementation of composition, but I will quickly describe to you how composition works. So composition is another way of getting code and putting it into a class. So it looks a little bit different, but the functionality is kind of similar. You can say, actually we'll keep that code, we'll get rid of that. And you can do something like include animal, and it would have similar, excuse me, I don't believe that code will actually work off the top of my head because I don't do inheritance in Ruby all that often. But the long story short is you are able to get the methods defined inside of this class and include them. So we're actually composing this lion class, and we could do another include of like, well, four-legged animal. So we could have specific methods for a four-legged animal class, which might be to like balance, or sorry, no, excuse me, you probably remove it for balance unless it was two-legged. But I think you understand the concept here, where we start composing methods into it and pulling them in. This has interesting benefits over inheritance, but I won't go into those because it's an academic discussion that we don't need to have right now. So we don't need that anymore. All right, let's do some bootstrappy stuff. Our website's looking a little bit barren and ugly. Let's have a look at it. It's kind of crappy looking. I mean, the title page is okay, but it's ugly. So, you know, aside from teaching you Ruby and Rails and all of that kind of stuff, it would be remiss of me not to show you how to spice your application up a bit, because, well, you're not going to present this to a user and feel good about yourself, and your user's not going to feel good about using it either. So let's have a look at how you would start off making it look a little bit more fancy. So we're going to use our gem file. So we've used gem files before, and we're going to use that. We're going to skip straight to it. And remember, this gem file is absolutely massive. We're going to add a gem called, I've already looked it up, it's called Bootstrap Sass. And this is a gem that uses, that pulls in the Bootstrap CSS framework. So it makes it available to your Rails application. And it shows you how to install it. So Bootstrap is easy to drop in. We need to have this Bootstrap gem. So we see that we have Bootstrap Sass Rails. We have Sass Rails, the gem already available to us as it says is required. But we need to add Bootstrap Rails. I recommend putting things just trickling down the gem file. There is things like grouping and whatever else. We won't get into that right now, but it has impacts on you when you're doing things in development environments versus production environments and other pieces like that. So for the minute, we'll just do this. And it's usually nice to add a comment to what the hell is the point of this gem. So it provides the Bootstrap CSS CSS.js framework for prettying up our application. And I believe that's all it says to do. So it says then do bundle install and restart your server. So okay, we'll kill our server. We don't need IRB. Bundle install. And we can see here it's added Bootstrap and dependency of Bootstrap. Restart your server. So we'll restart our server, bundle exec Rails S. And then import Bootstrap styles into your application CSS file. So we've seen this before. You know, this is our CSS manifest file. And it says Bootstrap sockets must be imported before Bootstrap and Bootstrap variables. So we'll just copy this, come to our app.css file. It's a little hard to talk today. And okay, so here's something that we're going to need to do. We're going to need to put this in here. And this may very well complain at us and tell us that it is not able to do it, but we'll find out. So it says it must be imported, and yes. Okay, yes, it actually tells us exactly this. It tells us that we need to rename the application CSS file to application SCSS because Rails thinks it's a CSS file and it won't try and parse it using a Sass pre-parser. So we need to rename this to application.scss. We need to move this down to @import. Oops, I didn't need that. We want to actually below because it needs to trickle down. We don't need any of this code anymore. The other two requires are basically to require everything else within this folder, but we don't actually need that. And then it will tell us we need jQuery Rails. So let's make sure that we have jQuery Rails. We do not. So we'll add that. And jQuery is kind of like Bootstrap for JavaScript. It's a framework that a lot of other JavaScript libraries depend on. It's a fantastically useful thing. It has inbuilt things like Ajax and all kinds of magical, wonderful things that we won't get into because I'm not going to teach you jQuery. Suffice to say, it's something you will pretty much have in almost every Rails app available to you. So we'll add that. Provides jQuery. Does it say in which order? It does not. Provides jQuery to our Rails app. Doesn't need much more than that. Kill the server, run button, install. And requires Bootstrap JavaScript in app assets Java. So this is our JavaScript manifest. And come to that. Oops. And chuck it in here, except it will go there. Now, the rest of this is for Bower stuff. We don't need any of this, I don't believe. More Bower stuff. Sass, fonts, eyeglass versions. Okay, so I think we've successfully imported this, so we can test it out. We can restart our server and find out what happens, and we'll adjust accordingly. So we'll come to our forum, hit enter, and see what happens. All right, so we can see that the CSS has changed very slightly, and that's fantastic. That's kind of what we want. So if we inspect, actually view page source, we can see here it's got a whole bunch of Bootstrap assets for scripts, you know, pulling in a whole bunch of JavaScript. It's got our style sheet. If we click this, it'll actually just be a very, very, very long style sheet because Rails basically puts all of your style sheets together in one file, one after another, because it can. And that's about some of it. So we've pulled in Bootstrap, and now we've kind of got this Bootstrap code available to us to work with. So let's kind of have a little bit of a look at what we can do with that. Grab the docs, and let's see if we can find an example. Collection of examples. Here we go. Oh, it's forward. That's a little bit of a shame. Let's see. Well, okay, I guess we don't need to do this. That's fine. What we can do instead is just write the code ourselves. Actually, here. There we go. So let's use the starter template. We can just rip this code straight out. We don't need much of this. Do we want a nav bar? Do we want a nav bar? Let's grab a nav bar. Why not? We can change it up as we see fit. So we'll grab this core section of code, which is from the Bootstrap example. And we'll pretty much just drop it in verbatim and see what happens. So this will go in our layout file directly above our yield. So we can see here, we've got this new code that we put in, and we're going to need to change up a little bit of it. So we can see here there's a few links inside of this list which pertain to these 3 links up here. We'll leave them like that for the minute, but eventually we want to change them to actual links within our application. Then we open up a container div and chuck a bunch of code inside of that. So what we'll do is we'll get rid of this. We'll pull this yield, which we remember from a previous episode is basically Rails' way of saying this is where the rest of your code will go from your controller. Get rid of some unnecessary content and refresh the page. Well, we can see that it's kind of worked, but we've overlapped this. This is like we need a clear fix change for this. This happens every time I use Bootstrap. I always forget the exact way to do it, but select element. Let's see. Let's view page source. There's usually a like a body padding thing. All right, let's just write it ourselves. I always forget how this works. So what we'll do is, well, actually, yeah, okay. No, we'll just change it. So inside of our SCSS, maybe we'll make a file called Bootstrap overrides. And we will say there. And then let's kind of do some sneaky stuff here. We'll modify this container class and tell it to have padding top of like 10 pixels. Margin spelled with a G. And this is where I find out that I'm not that great at CSS. So what have we done? Well, we could change the nav bar. Maybe we'll do that instead. Margin bottom 10 pixels. This is a really dodgy way of doing it, actually, because it requires then that there's always a nav bar. Why is this not clearing out? Very frustrating. Why has it not cleared out? So this is kind of what it's like writing code for a living. You do things, you make changes, you find out that it doesn't work the way that you expect it should, and then you go and fix it. Cutting top 10 pixels. See, this should be. See, that's creating padding here. If we change this to margin, that should be clearing things out from there. So maybe if we make it like 20 pixels. No. Okay. Well, let's get rid of the nav bar for the minute and stop screwing around. We can adjust that later. Get rid of the code that we don't need. Let's remove it from the CSS file because we we no longer need it. I'll have a squiz into that a bit later. I don't really want to spend too much time on it. The point was more to kind of get things moving in a more nice looking direction. the rest of the Bootstrap stuff shouldn't be that hard. So Bootstrap kind of lays itself out, or allows you to lay things out in a kind of like a grid fashion. The docs have a pretty decent example of how that works. The grid. So it's a 12 column grid. So you can see here it gives you this ability to lay content out within 12 separate columns, or you can split it by 8 and 4, or 4 and 4 and 4, or 6 and 6, or however you see fit. And it allows you to do some cool stuff like when you shrink the page, it will like shrink the columns and stack them for mobile usage and things like that. The basic idea being that it's meant to be mobile friendly. Just grab some water. So what we're going to do is divide our page up a little. It doesn't have to look super fancy, but let me see how might we make this work. Let's just put everything inside of one column for the minute. It's usually started like this. So everything is within a single row, or rather, you put columns inside of rows. You can see here it's kind of adjusted the CSS a little bit. It's kind of bumped it to the left. And then every page, well, we could do this kind of two ways. We could put everything inside of its own 12 wide column. Get rid of that. So everything's kind of encapsulated within a column. So we can see here it's kind of encapsulated inside of that. And that's within a row. So here's the column, here's the row. And if we were to do something like take another row, chuck it in here, and say, hi guys, maybe with a header so it's kind of block level. And you'll see it'll appear straight under that, and you can kind of have a look and see how rows function. So here's a row, although yes, it is inside of a column, that's good. So that's kind of how it works. And then if we were to shrink it up, they would stay stacked. Or if you want to see kind of how this functions in terms of shrinking columns, we can get rid of this row, we don't need it. Pull this up here. And it will split the row that we previously had into two columns. So it'll look kind of like this. And then if we shrink it, you can see that it stacks. And if we expand it, you can see that it re-expands. And that functionality is actually controlled by this two little letters here. And what that's saying is on medium-sized displays, we want it to be 6 and 6. So we could actually change how it displays on like extra small displays. Or we could change how it functions. So we could do something like this. On extra small displays, make this take up 12 columns and this take up 12 columns. So when we shrink it down, it'll stack. And then on medium displays, we want it to be let's say maybe like 8 and 4. Although this won't be particularly obvious, but you can see it kind of gives the thing on the right a little less room and the thing on the left a lot more room. But when we shrink it, it still stacks as we would expect. So that's kind of what Bootstrap's going to give you to play with. So we'll just leave this. It's generally a good idea to set all of your scaling kind of things if you expect rows to function in different ways or columns to function in different ways. Do that from the get-go, because going back and doing it later is going to make you sad. For one of the projects at work I'm doing at the moment, I'm overhauling the whole CSS framework, and it's been an absolute pain in the ass. So now that we have Bootstrap kind of giving us a little bit of nice, we can start making use of some of it by using the table class, which it gives us. It gives us a nice looking table. We can change the buttons to look a little bit more fancy, stuff like that. So I'll use Bootstrap here and there as I go through. I don't want to spend too much time dwelling on Bootstrap, because you're not really here to learn Bootstrap. You're here to learn. I believe that'll work. It does not. Actually, sorry, excuse me. It doesn't. Okay, we'll have to change that in a second. You're not here to learn Bootstrap. You're here to learn Rails, and this is just kind of one way of learning that. So let's see if we can find the submit action. That should take. It takes. Oh, okay, so it takes a. I think it's class button primary. No, it doesn't like that. Oh, okay, right. That's because I'm dumb and I'm doing dumb things. So it takes a value, and then it takes an option. Okay, let's do this. And this is just kind of like how you'll start learning Rails and learning how these things function. So the submit method that I've just been reading the documentation for takes a value, which we can kind of assume is the text submit, and then it takes options. Now, the problem with these docs is I don't really tell you what those options are, but I'm pretty sure from past experience it's actually a set of options which includes a key that it knows about called HTML, and within HTML you can basically define stuff that goes into the tag that you're creating. So in this case, the class that we want to set. And has it put it on? It has. Okay. So no, it can just take class apparently. See if this works. There we go. All right, now we're doing things with Bootstrap. We're doing the thing. Well done, us. So we can see it's actually altered the class of it and put the button primary, which is a bootstrappy thing to do. This form is a little ugly. We can change it up a little bit. Use more Bootstrap stuff. Add a class to this of, I believe it's form label. Add a class to this of form control, I think it is, and we can see how it changes it. So it makes it kind of a little bit neater and nicer and all this kind of garbage. Same thing here. And then this can be class form control. This is all in the documentation. So it kind of makes it a little bit neater and nicer, and it lines it up and makes it nice and how to manage to do that. Makes it nice and stackable and responsive. And that all pretty much comes with Bootstrap by default, and that's probably where we should leave it. I'm just going to quickly duck away to the bathroom, and I'll return very shortly. Alright, I drink a lot of water while I do this. It hurts my voice because I don't talk a lot usually, so yeah, water and the ladder. Now, we've kind of prettied up this form a little bit, but you know, we're going to leave it pretty much as it is. We don't need to do too much more to it, other than, you know, just be aware that we have Bootstrap now available to us to mess with. So next on the agenda was creating the thread model. Now the thread model is kind of interesting. So it has things called associations. This is the type of stuff that you need to think about when you're writing Rails applications, or pretty much any application that uses databases. It's your domain models and how they kind of tie to one another. So you can imagine that you have a forum that has multiple threads. So, you know, and we've created a forum called general, I think it was, or something along those lines. Actually, we may have two. Yes, we do. Actually, let's destroy them because they're kind of dumb. And we'll give them a proper name. So general for discussion, food for discussing pizza. And then let's create one more for programming, because Ruby is cool. All right, so we have two forums that we can put threads of relevant content into, because otherwise, you know, we're kind of just randomly placing garbage and it's not really all that useful. So we have a forum of food, and feasibly you could understand that there would be threads in there about, like, here's my cool recipe, and you know, I had this last night and it was garbage. And then, you know, for the Ruby one, we might have learn new Rails links, and maybe we have something like how I learned to stop worrying and love Rails. So you could understand that then there's like associations between these two. So one is kind of embedded within the other. Or if we take it one step further and actually use the nomenclature that Rails gives you, threads belong to forums, and forums has many threads. And so we'll actually be using this kind of in code within the model that we generate. So let's kind of get cracking with that. But first we need to create the actual model. We're not going to scaffold it. We're going to do it by hand because we are good people. But we do need a migration to tell Rails how to use the database. So we do need to use the migration tool in Rails, and it's a good time to learn. So we say bundle exec Rails gmigration create threads table. Now, if you do, Rails has some kind of magical cool stuff that allows you to create this. So you can actually supply things like ID, integer, body, text, stuff like that. If you use the correct sort of syntax behind this, I never remember it, so I usually just create it by hand, but we can go and look it up if we want. Let's see if we, here we go. There we go. So it shows us how to do it. Actually, can we do create? There we go. So it shows you how to create a table. So Rails generate migration create products, but instead of creating products, we're actually creating threads. And it shows you how to supply, similar to the way we're doing scaffolding, the fields that are on that model. So in this case, what do we got? A thread's going to have a title, I guess. It's going to have a title, which is going to be a string. What else does a thread really need? It could, I guess it doesn't really need a description. That's kind of what the title is there for. Eventually it'll have things like a user associated to it. Display wise, you might want to show the latest comment to it. I guess you could have it have like a body text, so when you create the thread you can say, oh well, this thread is about this, or you could make it so that within the thread, when you're creating it, it creates another of our domain models, which is what do we call it? Post. It could create a post on your behalf. No, let's keep it simple. So we'll have a title, and then we're going to use a little bit of kind of Rails magic again, and we're going to say it has a reference, and this is part of Rails migration, and it'll do a little bit of work for us. So we can say, in this case, it's saying a user references, and what this will do is, instead of user, we're actually going to use a forum. And what it'll do is it'll set up a set of associations for us, and we'll see how that looks. So forum references, did I spell that right? Yeah, I did. All right, and then we'll hit this and see what happens. So it's created a migration for us, create threads. Remembering this is in db/migrate. And you can see it's under here with a different higher number because of the later timestamp. And it's kind of given us that cool create table syntax as we had before. Well, we noticed we kind of missed something, so we missed the timestamps. Let's grab that and throw it in because we want them. They're kind of useful. It's given us the title string. It's given this reference foreign key, and if you don't know what foreign keys are, I highly suggest that you look into how referential databases work. But the long story short is, within every thread row, there will be a forum identifier that says this thread is related to this forum. So we need to remember to migrate our database to tell the database to be up to date with the code that we expect it should be working with. So we've created a thread. And now we actually need to create the model so we can start working with the database and the data. So we can grab this, and remember, there's not much to it. It's just this code. I just realized this was not the best word to choose. This may shadow. No, this should be alright. It'll be okay. We'll survive and work around it. App models thread.ib. Okay. Thread is I believe it's a Ruby inbuilt class. Yeah. This might cause issues. We may have chosen a really bad name. You can't have two classes called the same thing without them kind of clashing and overriding each other. So this may very well have been a very poor choice of name, but we'll see what happens. It'll be an adventure. Now, when I mentioned that you can do this references and associations, one of the things that Rails lets you do is have kind of like at your accessor. This is actually, remembering this is a method on the class itself. We can do something else. We can do this. Belongs to, which is a method on the thread class. It's a class method, not an instance method. Belongs to, and what does it belong to? It belongs to a forum. And this gives us a really neat way of when we're querying against threads, we can use a .forum method, and it will return and retrieve from the database the forum that is associated to it. It gives us a lot of neat stuff around how the thread presents itself and presents its associations, and it's also a really useful hint to people reading the code that these associations exist. And now on the other side of this association, a forum actually has many threads, and in fact that's an association we can put in. So we can come into a forum and say, has many threads. And that will work. So when we go to forum, we can type .threads and it will give us all of the threads for that forum. It's really cool, really powerful, and Rails just makes it so easy to work with. This has other useful benefits later on for things like including queries. So we can say, include threads, and it will pull that data down, or at least give us access to those the fields within the threads table as we're doing queries and constructing kind of more complicated queries. So slowing things down a bit, we've created a model, migrated the database, and said a thread has an association to a forum. Now, it hasn't done really much anything else. If we probably want to restart our server, and that's pretty much it. It hasn't really done anything to our application. It's just kind of put some stuff in the background that we can start working with. So what do we want to do? We kind of want to start being able to interact with threads. And we can go one of two ways about it. We can either build up all the views and the controllers and everything around it, or we can mess around with it in the Rails console first and kind of understand how things like this work. Now it's kind of a bit of a time to think about that. Which way do we want to go about this? Yeah, let's mess around in the console first, and we can sort of get an understanding and feel for how these associations work inside of the code. So bundle exec Rails console, and let's manually create a thread. Oh god, yeah, this may be a problem for us. So we're gonna this is where we find out that we can't use the word thread. So what does the thread have? It has a title. Let's grab a forum first. So let's get the first forum. So that's the thing that you can do when calling this class. You can use first, and it will go to the database and grab the first ID. The first instance of that. So we've got that now. And we'll create a new thread. And we'll find out whether this works or not. Nope. Okay. Damn. All right. We're going to have to rename it. Okay. Let's call it post, and then we'll call the thing associated to that comment. All right. This is a pain in the ass. But good time to learn about migrations. Well, nah, let's roll it back. Let's be lazy. Bundle exec rake db rollback. So this says go and roll back the latest migration you just ran. So get rid of it out of the database. So let's drop that table. It no longer exists. And we'll call this, what do we call it? Post. Yeah, I think it was post. And we'll change this association to has posts. We'll rename this migration to create posts and the associated class. Change this and rerun the migrations. Pretty sure that's all we needed to do. So this is just shorthand, bundle exec rake. Now we've created post. Clear that out. Restart the server. Get into the console. And whoops, we forgot to rename this. Post. We'll reload the console and the server. All right, and now we'll grab the forum again. And well, we can look at what the association has already given us. So we know that forum has many posts, and I've mentioned that gives you the method posts. So we can go forum.posts. You can see here it's tried to go to the database, find all the posts where the posts.forum ID is equal to our forum ID, which is 3. And it's an empty array, which is true because we have no posts. So let's make one. So we'll do post on new. I'm hoping I'm not going too fast for you guys now. I'm hoping that this is now familiar territory to you in terms of, well, we're creating an instance of a model, and we know that model exists, and we need to set some attributes on it. I really hope that this is stuff that you're able to follow along with now, and it's just a matter of trying to make sure that you understand the new content. If I am going too fast, yeah, then we'll find out. So let's set the post title to be, post title to be, what is this? This is the food thing. So, I love pizza. Do you? Now we can say, we can do this two ways. So let's have a look at the attributes that it knows about, posted attributes. We can see here is your ID, which we know about, title, which we just set, forum underscore ID, created at and updated at, which we know about as well. So the forum ID is kind of the interesting one. This is the foreign key that we were discussing when we made the migration. And you can either set that directly to the number that is the ID of the forum that it's associated with, or you can be lazy and give Rails the actual instance of the forum class and let it figure it out for itself. And this is actually the way I would recommend doing it. So you could either do this, forum.id, or you could do this. And I would highly recommend doing it this way, because you won't always necessarily be using the ID. This could be a different field entirely, and you want to let Rails do all of the heavy lifting in terms of figuring out how associations work together, because in more complicated applications, or if you want to change the way your applications associate models to one another, it won't always be forum underscore ID. It might be forum underscore UUID or forum underscore slug or something, some other unique column that you may want to have used for your associations. So we'll do this. Post forum equals forum. And then we can see post and look at it and say, well, it has set that forum ID for us, and now we can save it. And it's inserted that. So now we can say forum.posts, and it's returned that post as associated to the forum. And on the flip side of that, we can do post.forum and see that it's returned the forum as an association. And that's like the power of Rails, giving us the ability to just quickly traverse all of our associations back and forth. It's really, really cool. And it takes so much work out of building these web apps. It makes your life really simple, honestly. Some more water for my poor dead throat. Okay, so let's go and yeah, I think that's probably enough to get started on the controllers, because we don't really need to understand too much more about associations before we get cracking. Yeah, okay, that's fair. So I'll exit out of that. Restart our server for good measure, because I can't remember what's changed since we last restarted it. Excuse me. You don't have to restart your server all the time. I do it out of habit because I kind of like a clean slate, and to know that the code has been loaded in the way that I expect it to have been loaded. It's a force of habit for me. For most of the circumstances, you don't actually need to, and it can just kind of waste your time. So just forgive me my my idiosyncrasies and kind of nervous twitches, as it were. So let's create a controller, and we'll call it the not threads. We learned that the hard way. The posts controller. I feel like I should explain a little bit about why the hell we can't call it thread. The long story short is Ruby defines a class called thread already, which is used for how do you call this, like parallel programming or asynchronous kind of programming. It lets you spin off work that doesn't block the main program. If that makes no sense to you, I don't blame you. It's a very convoluted process, and hopefully for your sake something you never have to deal with. Suffice to say that that model or that class already exists. It's not a model, it's a class. Important to make that distinction. So when you try and create that again, Ruby goes, well, no, I don't want you to override that. And it is a generally bad idea to override that kind of thing. So we call it something else. There are ways around this. We could have used something that we've very briefly mentioned, which is called namespacing. And the idea is you use something called a module, and you give it some kind of name like my cool forum, and all our code can be namespaced under that module. So when we refer to it, we don't call it thread.new, we would call it my cool forum : and we've seen this especially with active record .thread.new, and then we will be allowed to call it thread, but I don't want to go through that because it's a little bit more complicated, and it just makes things a little more ugly, and I don't like ugly code. Yeah, sorry, I should be more explicit there. So we'll copy this class definition because we're kind of lazy, and just change forums to posts. I'm going to keep doing that because it really should be called thread. And then we'll start defining some stuff. So we'll have an index action. And we kind of know how this is meant to look. It's meant to load all of the posts from the database, and we know how to do that. So it's, my goodness, that's going to hurt a lot. And we know that this will then make this attribute available inside of the view, but we don't have a view, so we need to make one. And hopefully some of you will be shouting, but bro, we need to make the routes as well, and that's true, we do. We can copy this if we want, because we're lazy. Change this to posts. This is the index from forums. We're just basically copy pasting it to post. It has no description. We'll change this to posts. Change this to posts. This is kind of how I write Ruby for a living. What was it? It was title. Yeah, cool. So pretty much just replacing every reference to forum with post. Post here, post, new post. This will actually break when we load it for several reasons, some of which we'll comment out to make it work. Whoops, routes. Resources and posts, only index because we only set the index. And then if we visit it, it will break and tell us that we don't have certain routes. So what this is saying is there's undefined method post path because we've only created in the routes file the index path, and we know what this is from the bundle exec rake routes. So I should use less of my stuff and more of how it should look. So here is our original forums routes, and here is our new posts route, but it's missing the new post route equivalent for posts. So I mean, we can do this. We can remove this and restart. Refresh the page, and this will create the routes for us once it decides to load. Why are you taking so long to load? Okay, there we go. But this will basically go, no, I don't like that because there's no action new for posts controller. So that's kind of the quickest and easiest way to get around it. The alternative is to go and comment out the code that references it, but that's lazy. Alright, I'll slow myself down a little bit here. Hopefully you guys are following along and get what the hell we're doing. So here we can see that we're loading all of the posts, and here was the post that we created inside of the console. So this is good, but it's kind of wrong, because when we let's show why this is kind of wrong, or doesn't make necessarily the most sense. It's not strictly wrong, but it bears explaining. So we'll create the post show route, and okay, we're gonna have to explain some of the fancy stuff in the controllers now, which was always the plan. We've done this, we're creating a thread controller, and we're gonna have to talk about the magic methods. So let's go line by line. We're going to copy this and talk about it. So what this is saying is before action, which, don't forget, this is a method. It's just a method. Ruby just doesn't require you to put brackets for method calls. So this is a method on the controller that is allowed for us by Rails. And it has some simple set form, which doesn't make any sense to us, and we've kind of seen this syntax before, but it says only do this before action on the show action, the edit action, the update action, and the destroy action. And so what this is actually defining here is it's saying call this method set form before any of these actions happen. So when Rails loads the route, it'll come to the posts controller and start executing the code, and it'll go line by line. It'll go, oh, okay, I need to call this before action set form thing, whatever that happens to be. And this is a fantastic way of making your code a little bit more modular. So we don't really want to go and load the post in every single action. So you can imagine inside of the edit we might have something similar. And it's kind of ugly. You don't want to replicate code. You want code that is the same to be defined in one place, so you can use it from one place. So what Rails does by convention is have a set action that happens before the routes that it makes sense for it to be done on. So we can scroll down and find this set form method, which will be down here, and we can copy that. And it even says use callbacks to share common setup or constraints. Copy that. I won't talk about private. Suffice to say that it basically means that anything within, anything that tries to call posts controller.setForm that is not calling it from within the context of this controller cannot do it. So it's a private action that only this class can call on itself. If that doesn't make sense, don't worry. I don't like this syntax style. I prefer it not indented, but Rails indents it. So we'll do that. So we'll change this to set post. Set post. This returns a post object, not a form object. Change this. And we'll talk a little bit about what the hell this is. So find method we have used without realizing we've used it. And it basically, find method uses the primary key, that ID attribute, and it takes that value in. So it takes some value that is used to look up a post by its primary key or its ID. So if we go into the console and say post.first, we know that it has ID of 1, so we can do post.find1. And that returns the exact same thing. Or we can do post.find 10 and this will break because we don't have anything with ID 10. Right. And then we'll tackle this. So this params thing. When you make a request to a Rails application, there's a few things that happen. Actually, there's a lot of things that happen. The first of which is you get within your controller an attribute, or an attribute called request, which has all sorts of interesting things defined on it. It has where the request has been sent to by whom, and what time it started, and what parameters it was passed. So you've probably seen when working or when using websites, you'll see things like this kind of /1 business, or maybe even something like this, and blah equals blah. So these are parameters that are being passed to that particular action, and they are passed inside of this request attribute, which is actually an object, an instance of a request object. And we are given a method called params, which gives us kind of quick access to those parameters that are passed in. So in this case, when we're making a request to posts /1, we are setting the params attributes to have this one value inside of it under the key ID by default. How that works specifically, why you don't have to do something like ID equals 1, is a Rails convention. Oops, we don't have that yet. And I won't get too much into it. Suffice to say that the convention is when you are doing something like this, it is assumed that this value represents the ID. So we have the params, and it's a hash. We know it's a hash because of the way we're accessing it like this, and we're accessing it by the key ID. So we'll get the ID out, which in this case would have been a 1, and then we're looking up the post by 1, so it will actually replace it with that. So we don't need this anymore. We're getting it when we do the show action, and that's kind of how you share that common functionality. And let's grab this as well, because we'll need this eventually. So this is the other Rails magic. So when I was talking about parameters, we actually allow any parameter to be sent to us. Now the problem with that is it allows you, let's say you had an attribute on your class that was something a little bit secretive, something that you didn't want people to change. So maybe password for a user. So if you had a user model that had how do I represent this in the same way? That had a password. What's one of those like really common ones? NCC 1701, I think, is in the top 100 or something, or top 50. I think it might actually be ABC 123 is probably the most common. So you can imagine a user model would have a password associated to it. It's generally not exactly like this, but for example's sake, this is fine. And if we were to do something like allow anybody to submit the password parameter, anybody could change your password, which is kind of shit. We don't really want that. And the reason why this is a concern is, by default, we will take something like, and I'll show you an example, this forum params that is supplied by Rails, or excuse me, the params supplied by the user, and just shove it straight into the update method. And we know the update method takes a hash, so we're basically taking the params, which is a hash, supplied by the user, and shoving it straight into the database. That's bad. You don't want to do that. So you want to actually filter out things, or only allow certain things that are safe. So in this case, we have the params, which we've seen here. We can call a require method on it, which basically says the params hash must look something like this. Forum and then title, whatever thing, description, whatever thing. So this is the params that we are expecting to come in as set by Rails. And then the reason you do this is so you can do things like setting multiple things at once. So you could actually have like a post set at the same time. But we're not doing that right now. So we'll change this to post because we want it to be namespace under post, so we know that we're actually working with a post. And I forget always what it's a title, so we don't need the description. So we're permitting the title parameter to be passed to us inside of the params. So we're allowing people to set the title again. That's cool, that's fine. If it was something secretive, we wouldn't allow it. And let's get all the work done to show you how. Well, actually, we can filter this out now. So I'll leave this here for the minute, and we'll go back to the forum stuff and show you kind of how this works. So if we get rid of the allowed value description, so we're no longer allowing people to set the description of a forum when they're editing or creating it. And we come to here, forums. We go to edit it, and we change the description to for discussing whale, because we're not meant to eat whale. And then we submit it. You see that it doesn't actually update it. So we basically said, no, we're filtering this out, we're not allowing it, and that's kind of an important thing to do. So we'll put that back because we actually do want that. And that's how this parameter thing works. It's called whitelisting parameters. It's important to note if you are doing this on Rails 5 or Rails 4, that's cool. If you're doing this on Rails 3, you will not have access to this, and it works completely differently. I won't be going and doing any Rails 3 stuff because it's ancient enough that I wouldn't recommend using it. If you are working on a Rails 3 project, then, well, you probably already know what you're doing. So, yeah, suffice to say, this tutorial is primarily aimed at Rails 5. Almost everything will work in Rails 4. If we ever did anything with like action cable or whatever, then yeah, you'll have to adjust accordingly. Anyway, moving on. Let's keep making the actions. So we know that we've got this show thing here. We have the route defined. So we're missing a view for it. So we'll show it. Create a show thing. Let's be lazy. Grab this again. Grab the forum stuff, paste it in. It doesn't have a description, so get rid of that. We'll change the routes that we know about to be post. And we'll have a look at our post. Alright, what's it saying? Oops. So it's saying we don't have a forum because we're not passing forum, we're passing post. There you go, and that's displaying a post. If we were to change this to 2, it would complain because we don't have a post with ID 2, and it'll say it could not find post with ID equals to 2. Similarly, like something like -1 doesn't work. ABC won't work. So that's the ID of it. We can press back and we're back to the posts. Now, let's real quick do the rest of the routes. So we'll do new, and this we know needs to create a new instance of the post model. And if we go to new post, this will complain because we don't have a template, so we need to make a template. I hope you guys are following along with this and it's making sense and you're kind of getting that there's a rhythm and a rhyme to the way that you do these things. You kind of you set these things up, you find out what's broken. I mean, after a while, you don't really need to do this. You'll just know what needs to be done, but you make a change and then you try to do the thing and it'll tell you generally in a sensible way, oh, actually you need to do this as well. So, and then you make that change and eventually everything works and it's great. So, change the header. We know that we need that underscore form view in a second. We know that this is the name of the variable inside of that underscore form, so that's actually going to be post, and we know that this is supplied to us as at post, and this doesn't want to be forums fast and path, it wants to be posts path. That's going to be fun to say over and over. And let's create the form.html.erb. Again, steal some code, chuck it in, make some changes. If you're lazy like me, you can just do a mass change. And then get rid of things that don't make sense. So there's no description. That's, I think, all that needed to be changed, actually. Is there any reference to forum? No. So we probably now have the view that we need. Yeah, here's a new post. So we could go ahead and submit that. And let's do it because it'll break. Now it's telling us the create action doesn't exist. So remember there's 7 actions: index, show, new, create, edit, update, delete, or destroy. I always forget which one's which. So we need to create action, which is the thing that actually, well, creates the post. So let's make it. Def create. And so, how do we want to do this? Do we want to do this simply, or do we want to do this all fancy schmancy Rails? Now let's copy the code and explain a little bit why the hell it does it the way it does it. Okay. So we've seen before that we were able to instantiate a new class and set its attributes based on another class's attributes, or rather another instance's attributes. If you don't remember that, it kind of looks a little bit like this. So post equals post.first, and then we can say post.new, post.attributes, new post. Looks like that, right? Sets the attributes for the new post to the attributes from the other post. Let's not do that though. But realistically, what all that is doing is it's taking a set of, it's taking a hash and passing it into the new method, which we know can be set up to allow us to set certain attributes on the class at instantiation time. So in this case, we're setting the post's attributes to be whatever we pass in from the view, from the form. And we know how this works because we know how whitelisting works. So we basically create a new post, and it's like, well, why did we need to make one here? And it's because it uses that to actually call certain methods on the post inside of rendering the form. If you didn't have that, it would not be happy. It would say that it can't call errors on a nil class. Suffice to say, that's kind of how that works. So we create, or we new up a new post, and then there's this kind of respond to method, remembering that this is a block, so it's a anonymous piece of code that you can run, and don't be too worried about like what it looks like. Basically, it's just this is actually supplied as missed the end. It's just the parameter that you supply to respond to. Methods can take blocks. It kind of looks like this: def my call method and block. By default, all methods can take that. It's a magical attribute that is at the end of the method that is always there. So you can have like x, y, and you can actually supply it a block. by default, or you can explicitly say, do the thing. And then within it, it usually does something like this. And that's effectively what we're doing. I won't go into too much of how that works as an example because it's kind of complicated and blows people's heads, and it's really confusing. So let's just kind of use it and ignore how it works, because I think it's easy enough to ignore how it works. So what this respond to method does is when we're making a request, we actually send along the type of response that we are expecting. So when you're making the response, when you're making a request through a browser, which we are, it says, well, I'm expecting an HTML response. I'm expecting, the browser to respond as a browser. And when we discussed inside of the Ruby episode a long while back, and we were using Faraday to talk to that API, we remember that it responded in JSON format. So what this is actually doing is it's allowing the create action to respond to a browser or to basically an API call. So we could use the same action just by setting one little extra thing in our request and saying we want to talk to you as basically an API. We can actually kind of turn this into an API, and it's really powerful. You can even do crazy things like get it to respond in like XML or other bits and pieces like that. But for the minute, I don't actually care anything about JSON. We're not going to be doing much of that right now. So we're gonna clean this up a bit and just make it a bit simpler. So it's saying respond to, and we'll loop over the formats. If forum.save, and we know that, sorry, that should be post.save. If post.save, and what this is basically saying is for the HTML format, this is not a this is not a hash. It's actually another block style call. Well, actually, no, excuse me. It may be a hash in this case. It's a little hard to tell with Ruby sometimes. Suffice to say that what it will do is, I'm pretty sure this is a block. Now that I think about it, it's not a hash. I'm pretty sure you can do things like this. No, that doesn't look right. Oh, well, it doesn't matter. We'll leave it as it is, and we can experiment later. What it's saying is call some method that takes a thing and do that. Yeah, right. Redirect to some instance of a class and set some key notice to be some value forum was successfully created. Hopefully this is kind of a little bit obvious what it might be trying to do, but the long story short is what will happen is if the post is saved successfully, Rails will tell the browser to go to, this is kind of a Rails magical thing, another Rails magical thing, but basically what it says is when you supply an instance of a model that Rails knows about, with the correct set of the full 7 routes that it knows about, what this will do is it'll tell Rails to actually send you to post path. And we know what that is because we've seen that in rake routes of this particular post. So it will take you to posts /1 or 2 or 3 or whatever the post happens to be. But this is just kind of shorthand for doing that. So it will actually take your browser and send you to the newly created post page with a notice key saying post was successfully created. Otherwise, what it'll do, and here's the Rails magic, which is freaking cool and I absolutely love it, it will render, and render being a method that we have seen before in the post view. It will render the new action, which will go and call all of this code again inside of your browser, or make your browser call all of this code again. If that, yeah, let's describe it like that. Now, the cool thing with this is, because we have set at post and tried to save it, and we know what happens when we are not able to successfully save things, it sets some kind of errors method and attributes. It will actually pass back the errored out post and say, well, I wasn't able to do it, and that's how we get this functioning. It doesn't actually call this new method again. It just returns straight away and renders that new page with your errored out model and all of the errors inside of that model. So that's really freaking cool. It makes for beautifully clean code and is a hell of a lot easier than any other way I can think of doing it. So suffice to say, that's pretty much that method done. So we can actually go and start making a new post now. Well, we should be able to. New post. I'm getting hungry because I am. We'll submit that. One error prohibited this post from being saved. Ah, good. That was completely unexpected, but it's a good time to do it. Now, forum must exist. So, well, we've seen now what happens. This is the error was returned to us because the post failed to save. And it's rendered the new form and given us this kind of like, well, you know, you need to set a forum. And that's because when we sent the code, when we sent the parameters to the posts controller, we sent it with no forum ID. And so when it tried to look up the forum by ID nil, it went, that's not a forum. You need to give me a forum. This is magical, awesome, cool stuff, which you really should set. Well, actually, which is set as a validation. So it's a requirement that the forum exists when you set this. So it's yet another reason why you do something like belongs to, and don't just kind of leave it as as it is. So we need to fix that, which brings me back to the entire reason why I was complaining about why you shouldn't do this quite like this, and why in fact it should be like this. So you actually embed posts within forums, and that's how we structure our code, and it's how our routes should be structured as well. So we need to make that change, because we can't do this otherwise. So how are we going to do that? Well, let's learn a little bit more about routing. Let's add a root index. So when we come to here, it will take us to actually all of the forums instead. So what this says is for the slash, like for no route, take us to some controller, some action. So take us to the forums controller index action. And we'll refresh the page, and we're on the forums controller index action. That's just kind of a nice thing to do. Now what we want to do is embed this, we kind of want this posts thing to be embedded inside of forums. Like we want to have the posts from this forum, because we know that that's kind of how it's represented in our database. And realistically, if you've ever used a forum, you know that you can click it, and then it takes you to some set of posts inside of that forum. Like that's kind of how you navigate it. It's the natural flow of the application. So how do you do that? And the answer is kind of like this. And in fact, it may actually be just like this. Let's go read the docs. So, nested resources is what we're after. So this is the Rails routing guide, and it's really useful to, there we go, we don't even need it. That's really cool. Today I learned something that I had forgotten. So what it's saying is nested resources. It's common to have resources that are logically children of other resources. In this case, a post is a logical nested resource of a forum. And they have a pretty decent example of that. So, you know, an ad belongs to a magazine. So when you go and meant to like a /magazine/1, you can see all of the ads for that magazine. In this case, we're going to copy that and just do the same thing, but for posts. So we nest the posts resource within the forums. And it tells us that this will give us some kind of fancier little routes and shows us kind of some example URLs that will kind of do for us. So let's see what happens. We'll restart this and have a look at the routes that it's given us. So we can see here we have this new set of different kind of style routes. We've got the original set of forums routes, but all of the posts routes are now namespaced or nested under the forums route, and with :forum_ID and then /posts. And this is more Rails magic. So when you do nesting, it basically says that I expect inside of my routes, and I'll show you in the URL because it'll make a bit more sense. I expect I will get something that looks like this. This is the :forum_ID, as here, and then /posts. And then if we were to look at an individual post, it would be /1. So that's kind of how the routing is now set up for us, and we can do /new and /1/edit and all that kind of good stuff. So that's kind of now how our routes are set up. But it won't quite work just yet. So if we go do this, it will now tell us that this undefined method post path has happened, and that's because the prefixes have actually changed. It's now forum_posts path. So we need to go and change how all of these routes are set up. So this is now forum_post. This is now edit_forum_post. Similarly, forum_post. new_forum_post. Let's see what happens. Because I can't spell. Now what's it saying? Undefined local variable or method forum post. That's because it's forum posts. Helps if you do this correctly. What is it saying now? Undefined local variable or method forum posts. All right. Look at this, we'll just do this instead. Forum post. That's the way it kind of should be represented anyway. Now what's it whinging about? No route matches, action edit. Okay, so that should be edit forum post path. We have that. What are you talking about? Edit forum post path. Edit forum post path. I have this. Don't lie to me. Oh, okay, yes. Okay, now, so next thing. What this actually expects, and I should have gotten onto this earlier, sorry, is now when you're creating these routes, it expects a forum ID and a post ID as part of this method creation. And we're not supplying that. We're only supplying the post ID. So we need to have some kind of forum given to us, but we don't have that. It's not available. It's not given to us by the view, which is a real pain in the ass. So we can do it like this. We could do it like this, post forum, which is one way of doing it. Now it'll whinge about another thing. Again, whinging because we don't have post or forum. All right, now that's fixed. And you can see that the URLs generated are forum/post/1. And that's good, but only if you have already associated a particular post to a particular forum. since that's not always the case, we actually want to load the forum on every route. So we're going to use this before action thing that we've seen before, but to load set forum. And we're going to do that on every route because we need it pretty much on every route. So we're going to copy this and set the forum. And the clue how to do this is inside of the routes. So if we do bundle exec rake routes, and we have a look at this, we can see here is the ID, that colon ID, and we're using that here. But for the forum, it's actually set to forum underscore ID. So if we go set forum, forum.find, and instead of ID, we use forum underscore ID. We don't need this because, well, we don't need it here. And set this to forum. We'll now have available inside of all our views the at forum attribute. So we can refresh this and it'll tell us that it can't find the forum. Yeah, right. Yeah. This is because I like hard navigated to a particular thing. So I think this should be 3 from memory. Yep. Okay. Get rid of this. So here we see the forums. We're looking at the forum with ID 3 and finding all the posts, and here is the associated post to that forum. But inside of the views now, we also have, let's close some bloody tabs, post controller, and then post index. Instead of doing post.forum, it's safer to do at forum. Same thing, except it's always loaded and we always know that it's going to be there. Otherwise, if it's not there, it would have raised this big bloody error and blown up our application. There are ways of handling that, but you know, that's that. Now, let's try and create a post and see what happens. Okay, we need to change the form now. Forum posts path. I believe that'll fix that one. There's one in the form, which is whinging about, pain in the ass. So it's saying that it doesn't know anything about that, so we need form with. Let's have a look at the docs. Oh, that's interesting. Let's RTFM. Form with. I'm pretty sure we can supply. So we want to supply to this. There it is. On the actual documentation, basically what I'm trying to figure out is how we supply to this method the parent key, which is in this case like forum. Although we can change this to the local here, forum. Let's do this. Looks a bit nicer. Here we go. Model scope. Does it describe what scope does? Prefixes it. That's not very useful. This is not very useful for us. Let's model object to infer the URL and scope plus. Okay, we'll have to do a little bit of jiggery pokery. So the easiest way to do that is we can manually change the URL that this form will post to. So it'll be the where's the create forum posts path, and it takes that forum. That should fix that. So what we've done here is we basically said because this is now embedded within a forum, it wasn't able to find the post. It wasn't able to find the post's path. It expected that. It wasn't expecting it was now namespaced or nested within the forum. So what we've had to do is say, well, no, actually we want to post it to this other URL. So we set the URL key and said post it to the forum posts path and pass in that forum. Now we can reload this and see what happens. Well, there we go. Okay, so let's inspect it. And you can see here it's posting to /forums/3/posts, which is correct. And let's try and save it, and this should blow up as well. So let's do something like need to go eat, go eat soon. And it's telling us again forum must exist. Now, this is because we're not setting the forum on the post before we save it, but we are setting it always inside of the actions, so we can actually merge that in to the parameters that are used to create. So let's do that. The easiest way to do it is like this. We can use a merge method, which in Ruby looks kind of like this. If you have my hash called A with cake is delicious, and we have a hash with ice cream is also delicious, and we go a.merge b, so we're calling the method merge on A and passing it in the other hash. It puts the two key value sets together. So you can imagine when we have our request hash, which has the title attribute, and we merge in, knowing that we can use the forum attribute on the post model, merge in the forum thing that is set as part of our action loads here. So we're taking the forum that's loaded, merging that as a key value and passing that into the post params, and then we reload the page and say I need to go eat soon. Submit this. It's now, okay, now it's telling us so we need to change the routes. But it has successfully, at least you can see here, because it's got past this post save, it's created the post with the forum, and you can see it here. Well, that's something. That's the forum that we were passing in as part of it. What do we need to change? We need to change redirect to forum forum post path. Posts. Forum post path. Like that. And supply the forum. Otherwise it will render the new action. So let's go back one more time. Submit it. Okay, now it's whinging about the show thing. So we need to, that's the right one, post show view, edit forum post path, forum posts path. I think that's all we need. Yep, cool. Post was successfully created and is associated to the forum. So there we go. We can probably destroy it and it won't break. Nope. Okay, we haven't made the destroy action. That's fine. No, that's actually a fantastic place to leave it. We've talked about pretty much, I think, everything in here: redirection renders, magical methods, and sort of messed with a little bit of that. We've created four of the actions for the posts controller, and I'm going to leave it as an exercise to the viewer to set up the other three actions, which will be edit, update, and delete. And you will know from having looked at the forms controller, you'll be able to pull that code and kind of mess with that code and make it work. Everything else will be pretty much as you expect. So I'll leave that with you guys for now. When I come back, if it's today, we will carry on with something brand new. I hope we may finish making the domain models, or I may do that in the background. So we'll find out. Anyway, good luck.